5 years ago, I went under the knife to save her life. I gave Claire my kidney when her own body was failing her. I paid her medical bills when she was penniless. Today, on my 31st birthday, my billionaire husband, Grant, told me he was stuck in a board meeting. But when the waiter whispered that my husband was in private suite 4, I didn't find him with investors. I found him sliding a 5-carat diamond onto Claire's finger. My best friend didn't just have my organ in her body, she had my husband in her bed. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. James Family, your own sanctuary for stories that touch the soul. Heavenly Father, on this day, we bring this family before you. Cover every person watching this with your divine light. Heal the hearts that have been shattered by those they trusted most. Provide strength to the woman who has given everything only to be left with nothing. Lord, bless the humble, protect the innocent, and remind us that even when doors are slammed in our faces, you are opening a path to a kingdom we never dreamed of. Let this story be a light for those in dark places and a reminder that justice always finds its way home. Amen. If your heart is pure, like this video. If your love is real and you stand for the truth, comment, I am with Mr. James. Elena sat in the corner of the rooftop restaurant, the soft golden glow of candlelight reflecting off her skin. The city sprawled below her, glittering like a cruel mirror, reminding her of everything she had sacrificed and yet never received in return. Every light seemed to mock her, every honking car below a reminder that life moved on even when hers felt frozen in a moment of disappointment. She picked up her phone, half hoping, half dreading. The message was short, almost dismissive. Stuck at work. Happy birthday, babe. See you tomorrow. Her fingers lingered over the screen, trembling slightly, and she forced a smile. A bitter, brittle smile that didn't reach her eyes. She looked at the glass of champagne in front of her. The bubbles sparkled like tiny promises, rising and breaking on the surface. She swirled it gently, imagining the celebration she had dreamed of, her friends, her laughter, a husband who would look at her as though she were the center of his world. Instead, she was alone in this dim, exclusive restaurant, surrounded by strangers and a hum of polite conversation. A waiter approached, leaning slightly closer, his voice hushed. Private Suite 4. Your husband is in there. Eleanor froze. Her heartbeat caught in her throat. Private Suite 4. At first, she tried to convince herself he was with investors, closing a big deal, building his empire as he always did. But the whisper carried something else, a weight she couldn't ignore. A feeling she had tried to bury for years, the feeling that her world was quietly unraveling. She rose, each movement deliberate, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. The sound echoed in the empty corners of her chest. Curiosity outweighed fear. She had to see, she needed to see. Her hands trembled slightly, gripping her clutch as she moved toward the suite. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of light spilling into the hallway. Laughter spilled out, soft, melodic, intimate. Elena's breath caught. It wasn't the sound of a business meeting. It wasn't the polite banter of investors. It was too personal, too familiar, too devastating. She stepped closer, every inch measured, controlled. Her mind raced, remembering the years she had devoted to this man. Grant, her high school sweetheart. The man who had swept her off her feet with charm and ambition. The man she had stood by through every storm, every setback, every sleepless night of building a life that belonged to both of them. Inside, she saw him. Grant, on his knees. Her stomach dropped. The image was so absurd, so impossible, that she wanted to blink it away, to convince herself it wasn't real. But it was. He wasn't proposing to her. He was holding a ring, sliding it onto someone else's finger. Claire. The woman Elena had saved. The woman who had once been fragile and lost. The woman who now smiled at him as though the entire world had folded around them. Elena had given her a kidney, had spent months recovering so Claire could live, and now that same woman was wearing his love, his attention, his desire like it was always hers to claim. Elena's hands shook, her fingers tightening around her clutch. Her chest felt tight, constricted as if the air had been stolen from her lungs. She wanted to scream, to run, to throw herself into the nearest elevator and escape, but her legs refused to move. She was rooted to the floor, forced to witness the scene that was burning itself into her memory. Grant laughed, a warm, familiar laugh that had once made her heart soar. Now it was an insult. It echoed in her ears, a cruel symphony of betrayal. She remembered every word he had ever said to her, every promise, every whispered, "I love you," every time he had taken her trust as though it were a given. And now all of it was meaningless. Claire's hand extended toward him, the diamond catching the dim light of the suite. It was perfect, gleaming, untouchable. Elena wanted to smash it, to tear it from her hand, to punish her in the only way that could ever feel like justice, but she didn't move. A part of her mind whispered that she should run, that she should storm in, scream, demand answers. Another part, the part that had always been strong, always been quiet, always been in control, told her to watch, to see everything, to understand the extent of the betrayal. She remembered the first time she met Claire in college, how fragile she had been, how Eleanor had taken her in, how she had fought to protect her when nobody else would, and now that protection had been repaid with deceit, with laughter, with a diamond ring. Elena's heart pounded in her ears. She felt rage rising, sharp and cold, slicing through the pain. But it wasn't blind rage. It was calculated, a slow-burning fire that promised consequences. She stepped forward, the marble cold beneath her heels. The closer she got, the more the laughter seemed to freeze, as though the universe itself had paused, waiting for her next move. Grant looked up, and for a moment his eyes softened, not with guilt, but with recognition. He knew she had seen everything. Claire glanced up, her smile faltering for just a fraction of a second. That moment was all Elena needed. The cracks in the facade, the tiny imperfections, the vulnerability that humans inevitably carry. It was all there, hidden in the shine of that diamond. Elena's hand instinctively went to her chest, clutching the small purse she carried. Inside was nothing yet, nothing to fight with, nothing to reclaim. But in her mind, a plan was already forming, a seed of revenge watered with every betrayal she had endured. The suite was a perfect picture of deceit, laughter, love, illusion. And Elena was standing outside, an observer, a woman who had given everything and was left with nothing, or so they thought. Her breath slowed, her heartbeat steadied. She allowed herself one long, measured exhale. She would not cry here, she would not scream here. She would watch, and she would remember, and she would wait. Because Elena knew something they didn't. She knew that night was not the end, not even close. The betrayal was glaring, the pain sharp, but the game was only beginning. The diamond on Claire's finger sparkled in the dim light, but to Elena it was a symbol of arrogance, of selfishness, of overconfidence, and symbols could be destroyed. Her mind raced. How had she been so blind? How had she given her life, her love, her body, her soul to a man who could betray her so easily? And Claire, her dear Claire, the woman she had loved like a sister, had become the weapon in his hand. Elena stepped back slightly, letting the doorframe obscure her silhouette. She wanted them to feel her presence without seeing her, to know, on some subconscious level, that the woman they had underestimated was watching. Grant laughed again, and Elena felt a cold fury rise in her chest. This time, it was not desperation. It was power, silent, patient, waiting. She remembered the nights she had stayed awake, worrying about the company, about Grant's decisions, about their life together. And here he was, oblivious to the woman who had built it all alongside him, oblivious to the sacrifices she had made. The betrayal was not just personal, it was professional, strategic, emotional. Every layer was exposed, every trust violated, and Elena, for the first time, allowed herself to feel not just hurt, but alive in her anger. She straightened, letting her back brush against the cool wall. Every step she had taken in life, every calculated move, every silent sacrifice had led her to this moment. And she was ready, ready to confront, ready to reclaim, ready to make them understand that underestimating Elena had been their gravest mistake. Her eyes narrowed, a storm gathering behind them. She didn't need words yet, they would come. But for now she watched. She watched Grant's charm falter under her gaze. She watched Claire's confidence wobble when she realized someone was seeing behind the mask. And Elena smiled slightly, not the forced smile she had worn at the table, but a true, calculating smile. The city below twinkled, indifferent. But tonight, Elena would become anything but indifferent. Her fingers brushed against her purse again. She knew that within it, the first moves of her retaliation were already forming. This was only the beginning, and as she stepped closer to the doorway, ready to enter, a single thought echoed in her mind. Betrayal is heavy, but power is unstoppable. Elena's hand touched the doorknob. She was about to step inside, and in that instant, the world she knew would shatter forever. Would she confront them? Or would she watch the scene unfold just a little longer to plan her next move? Elena's breath was shallow, each inhale tight with the weight of what she had just seen. The world outside the suite seemed distant, irrelevant. All she could hear was the laughter that had shattered her, the soft murmur of intimacy that didn't belong to her. Her mind refused to stay in the present. It drifted back, unwilling yet unable to stop, replaying scenes that had shaped her life. She remembered Grant in high school, the boy with a crooked smile who had made her feel seen, special, alive. They had grown together, two souls entwined in dreams far bigger than themselves. She remembered walking to school, books clutched under her arm, him always beside her, teasing, laughing, promising forever in the language of teenagers who believed love could conquer everything. Back then the world had been simple, and love had been a truth she could touch. College had changed things, responsibilities, ambitions, the sharp bite of reality. But Elena had never faltered. She worked 3 jobs, sometimes sleeping only a few hours at night, just to make sure they never lacked. Every penny she earned, every sacrifice she made, she thought it was for them, for their future together. And Claire. Claire had always been there, a soft presence in her dorm room, a shadow that never left. They had shared late-night talks, secrets, laughter, tears. Claire had been fragile once, lost, desperate, and Eleanor had been her anchor. She remembered the night Claire collapsed, the panic that had gripped her chest, the fear that she might lose her. Without hesitation, Elena had offered her kidney, the very piece of herself that kept her alive. 6 months of grueling recovery, constant pain, endless nights of uncertainty. She had done it without asking, without hesitation, because love, real love, she had thought was giving, even when it hurt. She had believed that was enough, that the bond she had forged, the life she had saved, would create loyalty, gratitude, even love. But looking at Claire now, glowing with the diamond ring on her finger, laughing with the man Elena had trusted above all others, she realized how wrong she'd been. Her chest tightened again, a slow, deep ache that felt like it might suffocate her. She saw every detail. The way Grant's hand cupped Claire's, the way she leaned into him, the soft tilt of her head as if she had won something Elena had lost forever. The same hands that had held her, soothed her, whispered promises of safety and forever in hospital rooms and living rooms and sleepless nights, now belonged to another. Elena's fingers tightened around the strap of her clutch. Her nails dug into the leather, grounding her in the present, but she couldn't escape the memory of pain, of giving, of trusting. Love, she realized, could be dangerous, not because it was weak, but because it made you vulnerable in ways that others could exploit. She thought of the first time she had truly opened her heart to Grant, how he had kissed her under the streetlights, promising a life of adventure and partnership, how she had poured herself into that promise, believing in it so completely that she had erased herself in the process. And yet, here she was, watching that same man, the architect of her dreams and nightmares, betray her with the woman she had loved like a sister. Betrayal, Elena realized, wasn't a sudden act. It was a slow, creeping poison. It started with small lies, whispers of doubt, glances withheld, and ended in a moment like this, in a private suite, under candlelight, with a diamond that had no right to shine on that hand. Her mind raced, piecing together moments she had ignored. The late nights he claimed were for work, the sudden fascination with high society events, the compliments that felt rehearsed rather than genuine. She had been blind, intoxicated by love and loyalty, convinced that the foundation they had built was unshakable. Now, every memory came with a sting. Every tender moment felt tainted. She remembered holding Claire's hand in the hospital, whispering encouragement, feeling a bond that she thought was sacred. And now that bond had been twisted into a weapon, a tool for Claire to claim what Eleanor had once believed was hers by right. She felt a cold, sharp clarity settling in. The woman she had saved, the man she had loved, were pieces of a world she no longer recognized. And yet Eleanor refused to crumble. She refused to let tears or desperation rule her actions. This wasn't about immediate revenge. It was about understanding the scope of what had been taken and planning her response with precision. Her chest still ached, but the pain was no longer raw. It had hardened into focus. She needed to see everything, to remember every detail, to catalogue every betrayal. Because power, she realized, didn't come from love alone. It came from clarity, from knowledge, from knowing exactly what you were capable of and what they had underestimated in you. Elena's gaze flicked back toward the suite. Grant laughed again, the sound cutting through the night air. Claire leaned in closer, her fingers brushing his shoulder, her eyes glinting with triumph. Elena felt a spark of anger, but also a strange sort of respect for the audacity, for the sheer boldness of their betrayal. Her mind worked rapidly. If she moved too soon, she might lose the upper hand. If she stayed too long, she risked exposure, confrontation without preparation. She had to balance patience with presence, observation with action. A memory surfaced. Her grandmother's words, whispered in a quiet kitchen years ago. Never let anyone underestimate what you can do. They will, but only once. Eleanor let the words sink in. She had been underestimated for too long. But that mistake was about to be corrected. She shifted slightly, her silhouette blending with the shadows. Grant's confidence was palpable, but it was built on assumptions that Elena had quietly dismantled over the years, with effort, strategy, and patience. He thought she was naive, loyal to a fault, soft-hearted. Tonight, he would learn otherwise. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. She noted the details, the placement of the furniture, the angle of the lights, the slight tilt of the chandelier that reflected the diamond's fire. Every observation was fuel for what she would need next. Her heart rate slowed. The storm of emotions, the anger, the betrayal, the shock, began to channel into something controlled. Precision, calculation. Every fiber of her being focused on understanding the battlefield before she stepped into it. Claire's laughter faltered slightly, a hint of insecurity passing across her face. Grant did not notice. He was too caught in the thrill of conquest, unaware that the woman who had given him everything was quietly taking measure of their actions. Elena's mind raced ahead. She thought of her recovery from the surgery, the pain, the sleepless nights. Every sacrifice she had made had forged her strength, her resilience. Now that strength would serve her purpose, not in tears, not in screams, but in quiet, undeniable authority. She remembered the whispers of friends and colleagues, the subtle hints of dissatisfaction that she had ignored in the name of love. Every small betrayal, every overlooked sign, was now a thread she could pull to unravel their illusion of security. Her chest tightened again, but this time it was different. It was anticipation, not anguish. She had been prepared for betrayal in theory, never in practice, until tonight. And now that it had arrived, she could see it clearly, in all its raw, unpolished truth. She took a measured step forward, careful not to make a sound. The floor beneath her heels was smooth, almost betraying her presence. She stayed close to the shadowed wall, observing, calculating, ready. Elena's gaze shifted from Grant to Claire, and in that moment, a seed of resolve planted itself deep within her. She would not be broken. She would not be humiliated. She would act. But she would act on her own terms when the time was right. Every heartbeat, every measured breath reinforced her focus. She realized that the power she needed was already within her, cultivated over years of sacrifice, patience, and unrecognized labor. They had taken nothing she had not willingly given, but they had underestimated her resolve. Elena glanced at the diamond one last time, her lips curving into a small, controlled smile. It was beautiful, yes, but beauty did not make someone invincible. She had learned that lesson firsthand, and as the door between her and the suite loomed, she allowed herself to imagine what was coming. Not revenge in haste, but strategy, calculated and unstoppable. Every betrayal they had committed would be repaid in a manner they could not predict, could not escape, and would never forget. Her chest rose and fell steadily. Her vision cleared. She was ready to step forward, but not yet. Timing would be everything. Observation would be her weapon. Silence, her shield. Elena's thoughts lingered on Grant's pride, Claire's arrogance, the illusion of control they believed they had. It was all fragile, built on assumption and ignorance. And assumptions she knew were deadly if exploited properly. She moved slightly, her shadow stretching across the hallway, nearly touching the suite's entrance. Her presence would be felt soon. A single thought ran through her mind with crystalline clarity. They had no idea the storm they had unleashed. Eleanor's fingers brushed the doorframe just out of sight. She was ready to step inside, but a faint click from within the suite froze her in place. Someone else had entered, a third presence she hadn't expected. Who was it, and what were they doing in that private moment? Elena stepped fully into the suite, her heels silent on the thick carpet, her shadow stretching across the candlelit room. Grant's body stiffened, and for a heartbeat his composure cracked. She saw it in the tightening of his jaw, the slight twitch at the corner of his mouth. He had not expected her to appear here, not like this, not now. Claire's smile did not falter. It was a smile that knew it had power over the moment, over the room, over him. She looked at Elena with an unsettling calm, tilting her head slightly, her eyes glinting in the candlelight. "Oh, Elena, thank you for coming. Grant said you'd understand. You've always been the giving type," she said, each word precise, measured, dripping with a venom she didn't bother hiding. Elena's lips pressed together, not in fear, not in anger, but in calculation. Every fibre of her body was alert, attuned to every subtle motion, every inflection of voice, every tremor of unease in Grant's stance. She had walked into a battlefield, and now she could see its terrain clearly. Grant stammered, trying to speak, but his words were fractured. "Elena, it's not what you think. I mean, it's about the image. High society. She fits the company's—" Elena raised a hand, sharp and deliberate, cutting off the torrent before it spilled further. She studied him carefully. This was the man she had once loved. The man who had whispered promises of forever. And now he was exposed in a way he never imagined. She could see the thin veneer of charm peeling away, revealing insecurity, fear, the weight of guilt he could not hide. Her eyes swept the room, taking in the details, the champagne glasses still half full, the delicate folds of Claire's dress, the diamond glinting under the chandelier's reflection. It was a scene meticulously constructed, and yet it now felt fragile, almost absurd. The longer she looked, the more she realized how unprepared they were for her presence. A cold, sharp clarity settled over Elena. She was no longer the woman who had silently endured, who had trusted blindly, who had surrendered everything without question. She was here, fully aware, fully present, fully capable of turning the table. Her fingers brushed against the clutch at her side. Inside, her phone, her notes, her plans, every piece of leverage she had quietly amassed over the years was ready. She had been underestimated, and that was the critical mistake they had made. Claire shifted slightly, as if sensing the change in Elena's demeanor. For the first time, there was a hint of hesitation in her otherwise controlled posture. That pause was enough. Elena noted it, storing it in the back of her mind. Power was often in the small moments, the fleeting vulnerabilities that went unnoticed. Grant took a step forward, raising his hands in a futile gesture. "Elena, please, you don't understand. This isn't personal." Elena's gaze locked on him, cold but measured. "Not personal," she echoed, the words calm but cutting. "You stand here, on your knees, offering everything I gave you to someone else, and tell me it isn't personal?" The words hung in the air like a guillotine, and she could see the panic spreading across his face. His charm, the smooth words that had once entranced her, were now brittle, ineffective against the steel of her focus. Elena took a deliberate step forward, closing the distance between herself and them. Every inch she moved shifted the room's energy. Grant faltered as though he had realized too late that he was no longer the one in control. Claire's voice broke slightly, betraying a flicker of fear. "Eleanor, you don't understand." Eleanor cut her off with a soft but firm tone. "I understand perfectly. I gave life when it mattered. I gave love when it mattered, and yet you both thought it meant nothing when it came to loyalty, but you underestimated me." Grant swallowed, his face pale, a bead of sweat forming at his temple. He had spent years assuming Elena's strength lay in silence, in her compliance, in her willingness to forgive. He had miscalculated completely. The tension in the room was palpable. Even the chandelier above seemed to sway slightly, as if acknowledging the shift in power. Elena could feel it in her bones. The moment was ripe for her to assert control, and she would. But she didn't move too quickly. Patience was as vital as fury. timing, precision, and observation were her allies. She let her gaze linger on Claire, whose confidence now trembled under the weight of Elena's presence. Claire had believed she could manipulate and charm her way into permanence, but Elena's quiet dominance unsettled her. Every detail mattered, every glance, every pause, every flicker of expression. Elena catalogued it all silently, her mind already devising the strategy that would undo them. The diamond on Claire's finger no longer symbolized triumph. It was a target, a fragile illusion that Elena intended to shatter. Grant's voice was barely audible, a desperate attempt at reasoning. "Elena, please." Elena didn't respond. Words were unnecessary. She didn't need to threaten or beg. Her mere presence, composed, measured, resolute, spoke louder than anything he could utter. The room shrank around them, every lie and pretense crumbling under Elena's gaze. She realized she had been patient for years, silently accumulating strength and clarity, and tonight everything aligned. Her eyes swept across the suite one final time, taking in every detail. The angle of the curtains, the reflection of the chandelier in the diamond, the way Grant's posture had slumped, the subtle signs of Claire's unease. Each observation was a weapon, each second a chance to seize the upper hand. Elena's heart beat steadily, the fury and pain channeled into focus. She was no longer a victim, she was the force they had failed to anticipate. And then, just as she prepared to take the next deliberate step, a faint sound behind her made her pause. The soft click of a door, almost imperceptible, but distinct enough to cut through the tension. Her breath caught. She wasn't alone in this room. Elena's eyes darted toward the sound. Someone else had entered the suite, someone neither Grant nor Claire had expected, and in that instant, the delicate balance of power shifted in a way Elena had not anticipated. Who was it, and what would they do next? Elena's fingers brushed the rim of her wineglass, the smooth surface cool beneath her touch. She raised it slowly, letting the liquid swirl inside, and sipped deliberately, savoring the taste, but more importantly, savoring the moment. Every heartbeat measured, every breath controlled. This was not just about witnessing betrayal anymore. This was about reclaiming what had always been hers. She set the glass down with calm precision, letting the sound resonate across the room. The slight clink of crystal against marble punctuated the tension that had been simmering since she entered. Grant's confident posture faltered, a small, imperceptible shift, but Elena noticed. He had always thought her silent endurance was weakness, never realizing it was patience. Her eyes flicked toward the clutch at her side. Inside lay a folder, confidential documents, the kind that could topple an empire, built on arrogance and manipulation. 2 years ago, Grant's tech company had been on the edge of bankruptcy. Everyone believed it was a bank loan or some anonymous investor who had saved it. But Elena had been the savior. She had purchased 51% of the company through a shell corporation, quietly, anonymously, not for control, not for revenge, but to protect what she had believed in for their shared future. But tonight, she realized, there was no hour left. There was only what she chose to do with the power she had quietly amassed. Grant's eyes widened as he finally realized the subtle shift in the room. He had spent years underestimating her, assuming she was the dutiful wife, the silent partner, content with shadows. But tonight, every illusion he had clung to was shattering. Claire's confident smile wavered slightly. The diamond on her finger glinted in the candlelight, but it no longer seemed like a symbol of triumph. Elena's presence, her poise, her knowledge, her hidden power loomed larger than any jewel. Elena opened the folder, her movements deliberate, controlled. The papers inside contained board resolutions, proof of her ownership, financial audits, and records of her strategic decisions. She had known this moment might come, the moment when Grant's arrogance collided with her foresight. She spread the documents across the small table, sliding them slowly toward him. "Do you recognize these?" she asked, her voice calm but ice-cold. Each word landed like a hammer strike. Grant leaned in, squinting, his lips parted, trying to speak, but the words wouldn't form. Every excuse, every charm he had relied on for years was useless here. He could not deny what was before his eyes. The company he had believed he controlled entirely, the empire he had built on her labor and his charisma, was partially hers. Claire's gasp was almost imperceptible, a crack in her composure. She had assumed that wealth and status were immutable, that no one could challenge the carefully constructed reality she had stepped into. But Elena's quiet power disrupted it all. Elena's gaze was sharp, unwavering. She looked at Grant, then at Claire, and her tone softened slightly, the kind of calm that made a threat far more terrifying than anger ever could. 2 years ago, when your company was on the verge of collapse, I saved it. Not to control you, not to dictate your life, but to protect what we had. And yet, you chose betrayal. You chose arrogance. You assumed I would remain silent, powerless, invisible. Grant swallowed hard. His pride, the very thing that had built him into a billionaire, now shackled him. He had underestimated her, and that mistake was monumental. Elena closed the folder with a definitive snap. The sound echoed through the room like a gunshot. It wasn't just the papers. They were a statement. Every line, every record, every signature inside that folder screamed she was no longer to be overlooked, underestimated, or ignored. She took a slow step forward, each motion deliberate, her heels clicking softly on the marble. The sound drew every eye to her, drawing attention to her control, her presence, her command over the situation. "Grant," she said softly, almost tenderly, but with an undertone of steel, "you built an empire thinking I was just the wife at home. That was your first mistake." Claire. Her gaze shifted, cold and calculating. "You built a life thinking you could step into it without consequence. That was your second." The room felt smaller, heavier. The air itself seemed to contract around the truth Elena had revealed. Grant opened his mouth, then closed it again. There were no words left. No defenses strong enough to withstand the reality that Eleanor had orchestrated quietly, strategically, invisibly over 2 years. Claire's hand hovered over her diamond. She realized, maybe for the first time, that wealth and glamour were not the same as security or invincibility. Elena's hidden power had just become the new reality. Elena's chest rose and fell steadily. Her calm, measured breathing contrasted sharply with the rapid, shallow breaths of the two people in front of her. She had watched, waited, and now she had acted, not in anger, but in control. She moved closer to the table, letting the document slide toward Grant in a deliberate motion, her fingers grazing the papers like a queen claiming her throne. Each signature, each line of proof reinforced the dominance she now wielded over a man who had assumed she was powerless. Grant's pride had always been his armor, but now it lay shattered at her feet. Claire's confidence, built on charm and seduction, had crumbled with the revelation of Elena's quiet authority. Elena leaned slightly, her voice low, almost a whisper that carried an unspoken warning. "You wanted high society, glamour, and status. You thought I wouldn't notice, wouldn't act, but I did. And now you must choose. Do you attempt to salvage what's left, or do you watch everything you thought you controlled slip away? The silence in the room was suffocating, thick with tension, anticipation, and the undeniable truth that everything had changed. No one dared move, speak, or breathe too loudly. The balance of power had shifted irrevocably, and the implications were only beginning to settle. Elena's eyes flicked to Claire again. The woman's beauty, her elegance, her carefully constructed confidence, all seemed fragile in the face of this revelation. The diamond that had once symbolized victory now felt like a target, and Eleanor knew precisely how to strike without violence. Grant's lips parted again, but no words came. His empire, his image, his sense of control, all of it had been quietly undermined by the very woman he had assumed would remain silent, powerless, and loyal, no matter what. Elena's gaze softened almost imperceptibly, a subtle shift in expression that carried the weight of her intelligence, patience, and understanding. She wasn't just powerful, she was deliberate, strategic, untouchable in her control. She reached for the folder once more, organizing the documents with slow precision. "This," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the tension-filled room, "is only the beginning." A sudden knock at the suite door made everyone freeze. Elena's eyes narrowed. This time, the unexpected presence wasn't a friend, an ally, or a board member. It was someone whose arrival could tip the fragile balance of power even further. And in that moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Who had come, and what did they want? The knock echoed again, firmer this time, almost demanding attention. Elena's eyes narrowed, and she glanced at the door. Grant's face, pale under the candlelight, mirrored the sudden tension. He had no idea who or what was on the other side. The door swung open, and a man stepped inside, tall, confident, eyes sharp with intellect and curiosity. "Grant, what's going on here?" The voice carried authority, familiarity, and a hint of challenge. Nathan, Eleanor's distant cousin, a journalist known for uncovering corporate corruption. It had been 10 years since she last saw him, yet she recognized immediately the sharp, probing gaze that ran in their family. Grant froze, caught off guard. His composure, carefully maintained for years, faltered. Nathan's presence wasn't casual. It was deliberate, investigative, and the energy he brought shifted the room instantly. Every lie, every omission, every betrayal became vulnerable to exposure under Nathan's watchful eyes. Claire's elegance wavered. The smooth confidence she had relied on to dominate the room fractured as Nathan stepped closer, his gaze calculating. He didn't move aggressively, but the weight of scrutiny in his eyes was enough to make even the most poised feel naked. Eleanor's pulse quickened, not from fear, but from recognition. Nathan wasn't just a cousin, he was an ally, the kind who knew how to leverage truth as a weapon. And in this moment, that weapon was pointed directly at the two people who had underestimated her most: Grant and Claire. Grant stammered, attempting charm, fumbling through a rehearsed explanation about a corporate event. Champagne, high society. But Nathan's eyes never left him. "Really, Grant? And you think this story wouldn't come out eventually?" Nathan asked, voice calm but slicing through pretense. "I've been following your company for months. I know your deals, your offshore accounts, the little manipulations no one else notices." Eleanor's lips curved slightly, almost imperceptibly. Nathan didn't know her full story yet, but his arrival had changed the dynamics. Suddenly, she wasn't alone in this confrontation. This was no longer just her war against betrayal. It was a strategic coalition, one grounded in intelligence and truth. Claire's hand tightened around the diamond on her finger, the glint now cold and harsh under Nathan's gaze. Her lips parted, but no words came. The aura she had projected, an illusion of dominance and victory, was cracking. Grant, however, looked like a man caught in a storm. Every ounce of charisma, every practiced smile, every carefully crafted image crumbled under the twin forces of Elena's calm authority and Nathan's investigative scrutiny. His ego, once unshakable, was now vulnerable. Elena stepped closer to Nathan, subtly acknowledging the alliance without words. She didn't need to. He understood. They shared a history, a bond not built on manipulation, but on truth, and that trust was instantaneous. "You've underestimated her, Grant," Nathan said, nodding slightly toward Elena. "She's been invisible in your world, silent, patient, and calculating, but that's a mistake you've now paid for." Grant's throat worked. He opened his mouth, but hesitation stole the words. He had assumed control, power, charm, all of which now seemed brittle, fragile. Elena could feel his panic simmer beneath the surface, the first real crack she had witnessed in years. Claire's eyes darted between the two of them, confusion and fear momentarily overtaking her poise. She had counted on isolation, on Elena being alone, and Grant controlling the narrative. But Nathan's sudden entrance disrupted all of that. Elena let her gaze linger on Claire. "You believed your elegance could protect you," she said softly, almost pityingly, "but charm and beauty are meaningless against truth, patience, and strategy." Claire's lips tightened. She had underestimated Elena's intelligence, but more importantly, she had underestimated the power of family, someone who knew not only the public record, but the silent truths that Elena had cultivated for years. Nathan took a subtle step closer to the table where Elena's documents lay. He glanced at the folder, the confidential evidence of ownership and strategy, and nodded imperceptibly. No words were needed. He understood. Elena's preparation, her silent orchestration of events over the past 2 years, was now a tool in his hands as much as hers. Grant tried again, desperation creeping into his voice. "Elena, Nathan." "You don't understand," Elena interrupted with a single, deliberate hand gesture, her calmness a weapon more powerful than any shout. "No, Grant, you don't understand. You underestimated every small detail of my life, every moment I invested in patience, strategy, and observation. That ends tonight." Nathan's eyes met hers, and in that brief exchange, a silent plan was forming. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about accountability, public exposure, corporate consequences, and perhaps most importantly, personal justice. The air in the room was electric, thick with tension. Each movement, each glance carried unspoken calculations. Claire realized she was cornered, elegance failing her, as her carefully curated image crumbled under scrutiny. Elena's voice cut through the charged silence. "Grant, Claire, it's time you faced reality. Every decision, every betrayal has consequences, and you've spent too long assuming I'd remain invisible, silent, compliant. That assumption ends now." Grant swallowed, the weight of truth finally pressing down. He was no longer a man in control, no longer the confident, charming billionaire in command of the room. His vulnerability, long buried beneath wealth and ego, was exposed for all to see. Claire's hand twitched toward the diamond again, a fragile attempt at holding on to status and perceived control. But Elena's calm authority, backed by Nathan's silent but potent presence, made every gesture meaningless. The illusion of victory had slipped through her fingers. Elena's gaze swept the room, cataloguing reactions, noting every flinch, every hesitation, every subtle sign of fear. Power, she knew, was not just in wealth or status, it was in knowledge, timing, and alliances, and she now held all three. Nathan finally spoke, his tone measured, deliberate, with the weight of investigation behind it. "Everything will be revealed, Grant. Every secret, every corner you thought hidden, and it starts tonight." Eleanor allowed herself a slow, controlled smile. This was not victory yet, not final, but the first true step in reclaiming everything stolen, everything betrayed, everything manipulated. The room was silent, tension coiled like a spring. Everyone felt it, the shift in power, the inevitability of exposure. The next moments would define the outcome, and then a sudden, sharp sound from the hallway drew their attention. A soft footstep, deliberate, approaching. The door handle rattled slightly, and a shadow fell across the threshold. Neither Elena, Grant, nor Claire moved. Whoever was coming now had the potential to change the balance of power completely, and Elena realized she hadn't anticipated this arrival. Who was stepping into the suite, and were they friend or foe? Elena stepped away from the cluster of tension in the suite, her heels silent against the marble, and motioned for Grant to follow. The room felt smaller with Nathan still present, Claire frozen near the table, their whispers and uneasy glances creating a heavy hum of expectation. Elena's mind was a storm contained, every thought precise, every emotion sharpened into focus. Grant followed reluctantly, his polished charm faltering. His confident posture was replaced by hesitation. He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. "Elena, Her voice cut him off, steady and measured, though it trembled slightly with restrained emotion. "No, Grant, not here, not with witnesses. I need you alone. We need to speak honestly, without pretense, without distraction." He hesitated, the first flicker of fear crossing his face. Grant had always relied on spectacle, charm, and persuasion to navigate crises. He had underestimated the quiet force that Elena had cultivated over years of silent endurance. She had always been the patient one, the one who observed, planned, and endured without complaint. Now she was poised, deliberate, and untouchable in her calm. They moved into a small, dimly lit office adjoining the suite. The city lights outside stretched like veins of gold, but Eleanor saw none of it. Her focus was entirely on the man who had betrayed her, who had built a life with the assumption she would remain loyal no matter the cost. Her chest tightened. Anger, hurt, and disbelief mingled with a strange clarity. She realized that logic and patience were stronger than rage. Every action she had taken over the past years had been calculated. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every compromise had been done with intention, and now the world had tilted in her favor. "You chose her over me," Elena began, her voice almost a whisper but carrying the weight of a tempest. "Over everything we built. Our life, our sacrifices, everything I gave you, for what? Status, applause, validation from strangers." Grant shifted, opening his mouth to speak, then closing it again. He had relied on charm and reasoning, on the illusion of sophistication and logic to excuse himself. "Eleanor, society expects certain appearances. My empire, the investors, they need someone high society by my side. I didn't—" Elena's gaze locked on him, unblinking. "You didn't what? You didn't choose love. You didn't honor loyalty. You didn't even consider the human being who stood beside you through every storm." Her hands tightened into fists at her sides, but she didn't raise her voice. Calmness was her weapon, precision her armor. Grant swallowed hard. The confidence that had once carried him through boardrooms and ballrooms was gone. Vulnerability had crept into his posture. He realized that the woman before him was no longer silent, no longer pliable, no longer the one who would forgive blindly. Elena took a slow step closer. her presence commanding the small office like a queen entering a throne room. "Do you understand what I did for you, Grant?" she asked, her voice steady. "2 years ago, when your company teetered on the edge of collapse, I saved it. Not for you, not for your ego, for us, for the life we were supposed to have." Grant's eyes widened, a mixture of shock and realization settling over him. He had assumed that the company's survival was due to his brilliance, his charm, his negotiations. He had never known, or perhaps never cared, that the quiet force behind the scenes, the true pillar of the empire, had been Elena all along. "You built your empire thinking I was invisible," she continued, her words slow, deliberate, and lethal in their precision. "You thought the wife at home, the woman who smiled, cooked, and endured, was powerless. But every document, every action, every strategic move I made was deliberate. And tonight, it all comes together." Grant swallowed again, his throat dry. He realized, painfully, that his entire carefully constructed world, the boardrooms, the investors, the status, was vulnerable. Not because of Claire, not because of wealth, but because Elena had quietly accumulated power and strategy while he'd been distracted by appearances. She stepped closer until the distance between them felt charged, electric. "You wanted logic, reasoning, control empire," she said softly, "but you forgot one thing. The heart can be just as powerful and sometimes more lethal. I've used both, quietly, deliberately, and now the scales are tipped." Grant's hands trembled slightly. For the first time in years, he felt exposed, vulnerable, and irrelevant in the presence of a woman he had assumed would remain loyal, compliant, and invisible. Eleanor reached into her purse, pulling out a single document. One of many. She placed it deliberately on the desk. "This," she said, her voice calm but unyielding, "is proof that I saved everything you took credit for. Your empire is mine, partially as much as it ever was yours. And yet, you betrayed me. You chose status over loyalty, charm over truth. And now you see what that costs." Grant's mouth opened, closed, words failing him entirely. He had always relied on persuasion, distraction, and charm. He had never faced a confrontation like this, quiet, unrelenting, and backed by truth. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the city outside. Elena's breathing was steady, controlled, her eyes unwavering. The calmness was deliberate, strategic. Fury without control was useless. Precision was deadly. "You underestimated me," Eleanor whispered. "You assumed I would remain powerless, silent, and loyal no matter what. That was your fatal mistake. And now you must face it. You are not in control. I am." Grant's chest rose and fell rapidly. He had built a world on logic, status, and influence, but logic alone could not counter the revelation of hidden power, the force of strategy combined with patience, nor the impact of betrayal finally acknowledged. Elena stepped back slightly, giving him space, letting her words sink in. The man who had thought himself untouchable was now completely exposed, vulnerable, helpless, against the combined weight of her intelligence, planning, and courage. She realized then, fully, that this confrontation was more than personal. It was symbolic. Heart versus logic, love versus ambition, loyalty versus betrayal. And for the first time, logic was losing. A soft sound from the suite entrance made her pause, the faint click of shoes on marble, deliberate and measured. Her heart skipped. Another player had entered the game, and the stakes had just risen. Elena turned toward the sound, her eyes narrowing. Whoever was stepping into the suite now had the potential to change everything: friend, foe, ally, or adversary. She didn't know, but she sensed the balance of power would shift again, and not necessarily in her favor. The faint sound of footsteps had stopped, but the tension in the office hung thick, almost tangible. Elena's eyes narrowed toward the doorway, every muscle in her body coiled and alert. The shadow that had entered wasn't threatening, at least not yet, but it carried presence, significance, and the promise of disruption. Claire, standing near the edge of the suite, finally broke the silence. Her polished composure had crumbled earlier, but now it was gone entirely. The diamond on her finger, once a symbol of triumph, felt heavy, almost mocking in its brilliance. She had not anticipated the consequences of her choices, not from Elena, not from the unexpected ally, Nathan, not from the quiet storm of logic and strategy that now surrounded her. She approached cautiously, each step deliberate, hesitant, almost apologetic. Her eyes, wide and uncertain, sought some flicker of mercy, some acknowledgement that she could explain, excuse, or negotiate her way out. I didn't know," she whispered, voice barely audible above the low hum of the city below. Elena's gaze held her completely. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Silence had always been more devastating than words, and tonight it was her weapon of choice. Every hesitation, every uncertainty, every unspoken thought from Claire passed silently into Elena's awareness. Claire's shoulders tensed. She realized the gravity of her miscalculation. The eviction notices on the table were not just documents, they were symbols of consequence, proof that indulgence and arrogance had a price. The sudden halt of funding, the careful unspooling of control from the hands of those who had abused trust. It all pointed to one truth. Eleanor was no longer silent, invisible, or powerless. Grant shifted uneasily, realizing he had underestimated every subtlety. The empire he had assumed he controlled was slipping, not because of Claire, not because of external forces, but because the woman he had betrayed had quietly orchestrated a counterbalance that none of them could see coming. Claire's gaze fell to the diamond again, the 5-carat jewel that had once represented her victory. Now it seemed hollow, almost cruel, a reminder that charm and beauty could not mask consequence. She swallowed, realizing that Elena's power was not derived from anger, wealth, or status. It came from intelligence, patience, and the unyielding strength of someone who had been wronged yet refused to be diminished. "Do you see now?" Elena's voice was calm, soft, yet edged with unspoken authority. She stepped closer to the table, the documents laid out like a roadmap of accountability. Claire flinched slightly, as if the presence of those papers carried not just evidence but judgment. Claire's lips parted, then closed again. Words failed her. For once, she couldn't charm her way out, couldn't appeal to status, couldn't rely on appearances. She had been gifted a second chance once, and now the weight of gratitude, or the lack thereof, hung heavily between them. Elena's gaze didn't waver. She was aware of every reaction. The tremor in Claire's hands, the tightening of her jaw, the flicker of guilt in her eyes. All of it was proof that the lesson had landed, that the scales were finally balanced, at least partially, in a world where betrayal had once gone unpunished. Nathan watched from the side, silent but calculating. His presence was a quiet reinforcement of truth, a mirror reflecting the reality that none of these actions existed in isolation. Every choice, every hidden power, every strategic move Elena had made was now visible to someone who understood consequence and exposure. Grant, meanwhile, tried to interject, to find a loophole, to salvage his dignity, but every word seemed feeble under the weight of logic and moral accountability Elena wielded effortlessly. His charm was gone, replaced by desperation, recognition, and fear of exposure. Claire's voice finally found strength, though it trembled. "Elena," I never meant. Elena raised a hand, stopping her before she could attempt excuses. I don't need explanations, Claire. I need acknowledgement. You owe me respect. You owed me life once, and now you owe me recognition of my power, my agency, and my intelligence. And let me be clear, respect is not bought with jewels, charm, or apology alone. Claire flinched again, the weight of realization pressing down. She had spent years believing gratitude could be repaid with superficial gestures, that survival meant power, that wealth could substitute for loyalty. Elena's calm authority dismantled all of those illusions in one measured sweep. Nathan nodded subtly, understanding the gravity of the moment. He had seen people underestimate Elena before, but witnessing her navigate betrayal, reclaim control, and command respect was striking even to him. Every observation he had made as a journalist, every subtle clue he had gathered about corporate manipulation was mirrored in Elena's deliberate orchestration of justice and power. Grant's hands twitched. He realized that every attempt to charm, explain, or manipulate would fail. He had relied on appearances, assumed compliance, and counted on invisibility. All of that had evaporated. Eleanor's strategy was complete, precise, and terrifyingly effective. Claire's gaze fell once more to the eviction notices and halted funding documents. She saw her indulgence, her betrayal, and the unintended consequences of her ambition laid bare. The diamond on her finger felt cold, almost like a warning. Every choice had a cost, and tonight she finally understood what she had neglected to calculate. Elena's voice softened, almost imperceptibly, yet it carried a deadly precision. Remember this feeling, Claire. Let it guide your future choices. Power, loyalty, intelligence, these are not things given freely. They are earned, protected, and respected. You've had a taste, and I hope you've learned. Claire swallowed, trembling slightly. She understood finally that she had crossed a line, and that restitution, if it were possible at all, required more than charm, apology, or superficial gestures. Elena had reclaimed her agency, her power, and the upper hand, leaving Claire to confront the full weight of her choices. Grant finally stepped back, the realization fully sinking in. Eleanor was no longer the silent wife, the compliant partner. She was a force of intellect, strategy, and unassailable calm. Every advantage he had counted on was gone, stripped away by patience, planning, and moral clarity. Elena turned back to the city skyline, her silhouette framed by the glittering lights below. She was calm, collected, resolute. The woman who had once been betrayed had now orchestrated the consequences with precision. A faint, almost imperceptible vibration in her phone caught her attention. She glanced down, her eyes narrowing. A message appeared, anonymous, encrypted, and urgent. The text was simple. "Elena, they're not finished. The next move is coming. Be ready." Elena's pulse quickened. Someone, somewhere, knew the depth of the battle she had started, and they were making the next move. She realized that even in victory, the game was far from over, and a new, unexpected threat was about to emerge. Eleanor's fingers hovered over the wineglass, but she didn't touch it. Her calm was a weapon, deliberate and precise. Grant's desperation pulsed in the room like electricity, thick and palpable. He leaned forward, eyes pleading, voice smooth but unconvincing. "Elena, please, don't let this destroy everything. We can fix it. I can make it right. Give me a second chance." Nathan, standing a few steps back, didn't flinch. Every subtle twitch in Grant's demeanor, every faltering word was being catalogued, silently recorded, and stored as evidence. He knew the impact of this moment. The combination of Elena's controlled presence and Nathan's quiet observation created a pressure that was suffocating for anyone who had relied on manipulation to get through life. Elena's gaze never wavered. Her heart had been wounded, betrayed, and tested repeatedly. But she had long ago realized that emotion, when fused with logic and strategy, could be far more powerful than blind forgiveness. "Grant," she said softly, her voice smooth, deliberate, "you speak of a second chance as if I am a toy to be played with, as if loyalty, trust, and love are things to be bargained for. You are mistaken." Grant swallowed hard. His arrogance, the same charm that had carried him through boardrooms and high-profile deals, had no power here. His hands twitched involuntarily. The more he tried to manipulate, the more transparent his tactics became. Every word he had rehearsed, every plea he thought would sway her, crumbled in the face of Elena's composed authority. Claire shifted nervously, her elegant posture faltering. She had assumed that wealth and glamour could smooth over mistakes, that charm and status were unassailable shields. Now, every illusion she had relied on was exposed, every carefully constructed layer of influence rendered meaningless in the presence of Elena's quiet but overwhelming control. Elena stepped closer, deliberately closing the distance between herself and the two who had underestimated her. Her voice lowered slightly, a hint of steel beneath the softness. "I've spent years building patience, calculating consequences, and observing your moves. Every action you've taken, every betrayal you've committed has been accounted for, and now the outcome is mine to decide." Grant's lips parted again, but no words emerged. He was unaccustomed to a situation in which persuasion failed, in which charm had no currency, in which the woman he had assumed would always yield held the upper hand so completely. Nathan leaned in slightly, his gaze unwavering, silently reinforcing Elena's position. Every document she had presented, every strategic move she had made over the past 2 years, was now a shield and a sword. He had seen many battles in the corporate world, but nothing compared to this. Personal betrayal intertwined with financial power and emotional intelligence. Elena's eyes swept over Grant, and then Claire. Her next words carried the weight of every calculated choice she had made, a quiet hammer strike that left no room for evasion. "Claire," she said, her voice calm but cutting, "keep the kidney. It's the only thing in you that actually has a soul." The room fell silent. The statement echoed like a verdict, reverberating in every corner, every shadow, every unspoken thought. Claire's eyes widened, the diamond on her finger seeming suddenly meaningless, hollow, a stark reminder that status, wealth, and beauty could never substitute for integrity. Grant's jaw tightened. He had relied on appearances, charm, and manipulation for decades, and now they were useless. His empire, once a symbol of dominance, was no longer under his control. Every advantage he thought he had was stripped away in a calculated sweep, leaving him exposed, humiliated, and powerless. Elena stepped back, her posture calm, composed, commanding. She had not raised her voice, had not screamed, had not begged for recognition. Yet her presence dominated the room more completely than any display of arrogance or charm ever could. Every action she took had been deliberate, every pause intentional, every gesture precise. Nathan's expression remained neutral, but his eyes gleamed with quiet approval. He knew the importance of this moment, not just for Elena, not just for corporate exposure, but for personal vindication. Trust and betrayal, power and consequence all converged in this room, and Elena stood at the center, untouchable, unstoppable. Claire's fingers trembled slightly around the diamond. She had spent years believing in charm and influence, but now the truth of consequence pressed down. The illusion of invincibility she had cultivated was gone. The woman who had saved her life, the woman she had thought would be a passive witness to her success, was now the arbiter of power, control, and justice. Grant moved slightly, as if to protest, to plead, to regain even a sliver of control. But Elena's eyes locked on his, steady, unyielding, and he faltered. No words would reach her, no arguments could sway her. The scales had tipped, and he was now entirely at her mercy. She reached for the folder on the table again, letting the papers slide slightly, a subtle display of her ownership and control. The documents were not just evidence, they were a manifestation of strategy, patience, and foresight. Everything Grant had assumed he controlled had been quietly redirected, orchestrated, and protected by the very woman he had tried to undermine. Eleanor allowed a faint, almost imperceptible smile. It was not one of triumph over cruelty, but of satisfaction, precision, and restored balance. The betrayal, the manipulation, the arrogance, all of it had been neutralized, accounted for, and addressed. The room remained heavy with tension. Every movement, every breath, every glance was charged with unspoken understanding. Grant had lost more than his charm. He had lost control. Claire had lost the illusion of invincibility. And Eleanor? She had reclaimed not just her power, but the authority to decide the fate of everyone who had underestimated her. Yet even in this moment of apparent victory, Eleanor felt the subtle tremor of uncertainty. The text she had received earlier, the warning that the next move was coming, lingered in her mind. Power, strategy, and justice could only hold until the next challenge arose. She glanced at Nathan, who gave a subtle nod. He understood. Every step had been documented, every word observed, and yet the battle was far from over. The next opponent, the next threat, could emerge from any corner, invisible, prepared, and determined. Eleanor's calm mask never faltered. Her resolve had been tested, her patience stretched, her intelligence challenged. And yet, she stood unbroken, every action measured, every emotion controlled, every consequence accounted for. Grant's shoulders slumped slightly. He was no longer the man in command, no longer the charming, untouchable figure. He was exposed, humbled, and aware for the first time of the quiet but formidable force he had betrayed. Claire's breath came in shallow, uncertain gasps. She realized that wealth, elegance, and survival were nothing without integrity, loyalty, and respect. The diamond on her finger had lost its power, replaced by the realization of consequence and the inescapable weight of gratitude denied. Elena turned to the city skyline again, the glittering lights below reflecting in her eyes. The empire she had quietly reclaimed, the betrayal she had confronted, the personal power she had restored, it was all real. It was hers. And then a faint, almost imperceptible vibration from her phone made her pause. Another message appeared, anonymous, urgent, and encrypted. The text was short. Tonight was only the beginning. They're watching, and the next move is inevitable. Elena's pulse quickened. Even in victory, she realized the game was far from over. Someone, somewhere, was plotting, observing, and ready to strike. She had reclaimed power, but the real test, the ultimate confrontation, was only just beginning. Elena's heels clicked against the marble as she left the private suite, each step measured, deliberate, echoing through the hall with authority. The city lights outside painted long streaks of gold on the polished floor, reflecting her poise, her calm, and the power that radiated from her with every movement. The air was heavy, thick with tension, and yet she seemed untouched, almost untouchable. Behind her, the security guards, hired discreetly months earlier, unknown even to Grant, shifted slightly, a silent wall of protection and control. Their presence was a subtle message. The rules of the game had changed. No longer could Grant or Claire rely on intimidation, manipulation, or charm. Eleanor had ensured that the environment itself was hers to command. Nathan's camera followed every step, his movements precise and discreet. Every subtle glance, every flicker of emotion from the duo left behind was captured. This wasn't just documentation, it was a record, a safeguard, a statement of power. In a world where appearances mattered more than truth, Nathan ensured that reality would not be hidden again. Grant stumbled forward, desperation etched across his face. He opened his mouth, intending to plead, to explain, to beg. But the security guard's subtle hand gestures stopped him cold. He froze in place, realization dawning too late. He had underestimated Elena in every possible way. His carefully constructed empire, the charm and arrogance he wielded like weapons, were now meaningless. Claire's eyes darted nervously around the room, the diamond on her finger catching the light but offering no comfort. Wealth, elegance, and superficial status had been her armor, but it had failed spectacularly. Every indulgence, every calculated step meant to secure her position had been neutralized. The consequences of her choices now hung around her like chains she could not shake off. Elena's mind was a calculated storm, every emotion harnessed, every thought deliberate. This was not just revenge, it was restoration, reclamation, and redefinition. She had endured betrayal, manipulation, and arrogance, and now she stood unbroken, the architect of the consequences that had been quietly unfolding. Grant's gaze followed her retreating figure. His eyes widened as the realization hit fully. He had lost. Not just control of the situation, not just influence, but respect, dignity, and the illusion of superiority he had long relied on. Eleanor's strategic patience had dismantled his ego with surgical precision. Claire took a hesitant step forward, attempting to salvage some fragment of dignity. "Eleanor, Her voice faltered, weak, ineffective. No words could undo the truth, the evidence, the meticulous plan Elena had executed flawlessly. Every choice Claire had made, every indulgence she had allowed herself, now collided with the reality she had never anticipated. Nathan's presence was a quiet reinforcement of consequence. He did not intervene, did not speak. His eyes simply observed, catalogued, and recorded. In this room where betrayal had once seemed invisible, nothing would remain hidden. Every glance, every expression, every faltering step would serve as a permanent record of accountability. Elena finally paused in the center of the hall, turning slowly to look at the two who had underestimated her. Her posture was relaxed, calm, absolute, but the intensity in her eyes conveyed a truth they could not ignore. She was not just victorious, she was untouchable. Grant swallowed, his voice barely audible. "Elena, please." She didn't answer. Words were unnecessary. The weight of her presence, the clarity of her actions, and the inevitability of consequences spoke louder than any plea. His empire, his influence, and even his charm could not penetrate the calm, calculated authority she now wielded. Claire's fingers tightened around the diamond once more. She had chased status, power, and recognition, believing them to be the pinnacle of survival. Yet here she stood, stripped of illusion, confronted with the reality that loyalty, integrity, and strategy carried far more weight than wealth or beauty. Elena's mind flicked to the documents Nathan had captured. the proof of her hidden control, the eviction notices, the financial maneuvers that had ensured balance, the contracts that silently shifted power from manipulation to rightful ownership. Each piece was a weapon, each record a testament to her strategic foresight. Grant's shoulders slumped. Humiliation replaced arrogance. Fear replaced charm. For the first time, he understood what it meant to be powerless in the presence of someone he had once assumed would always yield. The lesson was bitter, sharp, and unavoidable. Claire finally spoke again, voice trembling. I didn't realize. Eleanor's gaze softened just slightly, but only enough to convey authority, not forgiveness. Now you do, she said calmly. And let this be a lesson. Life, choices, and consequences are rarely as superficial as they seem. The debts we owe, the respect we fail to give, and the power we underestimate will always catch up with us. Nathan's camera captured every detail, the shift in Claire's posture, Grant's realization, Eleanor's composed triumph, every silent moment, every subtle expression, every glance held meaning, a record of accountability that could never be erased. Elena took a deep breath, letting the city lights outside mirror the clarity she now possessed. Her heart was steady, her mind sharp. Every move she had made, every consequence she had orchestrated, had brought her here, fully in control, fully seen, fully respected. Grant tried again, desperate, hushed, pleading, "Please, don't!" But Elena was beyond the reach of desperation, beyond the illusions of charm, beyond the false security of status and influence. The tide had turned irreversibly, and every effort he made now was simply proof of his miscalculation. Claire's eyes filled with unspoken understanding, the gravity of her actions weighing heavily. The diamond she'd flaunted so carelessly now seemed meaningless, a reminder that indulgence without respect and loyalty carried consequences she had never imagined. Elena's posture remained regal, her calm unbroken, her authority absolute. She had reclaimed not just the narrative of the evening, but the narrative of her life, her empire, and her dignity. Every move she made had been deliberate, every pause strategic, every breath measured. And yet, even in this moment of triumph, a subtle tension lingered. The anonymous text from earlier, the warning that the next move was coming, echoed faintly in her mind. Power and control were never static. The game, though momentarily won, was far from complete. Her gaze shifted to the shadows at the edge of the suite. The city lights reflected in her eyes, sharp, calculating, and ready. Victory had been achieved tonight, but the next challenge awaited, unseen, unpredictable, and potentially unstoppable. Nathan's presence reinforced the truth of the moment. Every subtle interaction, every silent gesture, every unspoken word had been documented. The fallout would be felt far beyond this suite, in boardrooms, in whispers, in consequences no one had yet imagined. Elena's calm was absolute, but her mind raced with possibility. The threads of strategy, of exposure, of moral justice were still in motion, and she was poised to act when the next opportunity or threat arose. Grant, pale and defeated, realized fully that success without integrity, without respect, without understanding, was meaningless. Every empire built on manipulation and charm was temporary, fragile, and hollow. Claire, facing the consequences of indulgence and betrayal, understood finally the depth of accountability, the weight of choice, and the cost of underestimating the woman she had once called friend. Elena's heartbeat was steady, yet anticipation simmered beneath the calm surface. The city outside buzzed obliviously, unaware of the strategic victory, the emotional reckoning, the balance of power that had just shifted. A faint vibration on her phone made her pause. Another message, encrypted, anonymous, urgent. The text appeared, "They're coming. Not everyone is who they seem. Trust carefully, act decisively." Elena's pulse quickened. Victory had its cost, and now a new, unseen adversary had entered the game. She realized that tonight's triumph was only the prelude. Someone powerful, strategic, and dangerous was watching, and the ultimate confrontation was yet to come.